This is Academic Sappho. So I'll be reacting to Tucker Carlson. I thought this video was interesting in light of the recent news. So I'll just get into it.
And died today in Scotland, as you likely know, at the age of 96. She was the longest serving monarch in British history. She was born in one world and died in another. It's not easy to maintain your dignity while living in the public eye. Most of us could not pull it off for an afternoon. Queen Elizabeth did it for more than 70 years. I want to ask you all, she wrote shortly before her coronation in 1953, whatever your religion may be, to pray for me on that day, to pray that God may give me wisdom and strength to carry out the solemn promises I shall be making, and that I may faithfully serve him and you all the days of my life. For the most part, she did just that, and that was not a small achievement given the period she lived in. The week that Elizabeth was coronated, Edmund Hillary, a British subject from New Zealand, a beekeeper, became the first man in history to summit Mount Everest. The achievement seemed symbolic at the time, Britain on top of the world. But in fact, Britain was already over, whether the British knew it or not. To this day, Britain claims to have won both of the 20th century's world wars, but together they destroyed that nation forever. After victory came humiliation. The empire evaporated, and along with it, Britain's self-confidence and ultimately its self-respect. It's hard to believe now, but Britain wasn't always a regional banking center / refugee camp. It was a real place with a history and a language and a culture and a genuinely remarkable people. A country in the North Atlantic the size of Alabama that somehow took over the world and ruled it with decency unmatched by any empire in human history. The British Empire was not perfect, but it was far more humane than any other, ever.
Okay, so that's the line number one. That's what they like to say. It wasn't perfect. You know, America wasn't perfect. Enslavement wasn't perfect. So they'll bring up the wasn't perfect talking point to highlight, in a sense, highlight the good that came out of imperialism, colonialism, because they like to say that the good came out of it, so we should look at the good. We shouldn't let the bad outweigh the good, but the bad definitely outweighs the perceived good, because even the perceived good is not really good anyways, for a country or for people, you know, especially on Fox that like to talk about America being an independent country and everything. They like to say constantly that colonialism was good, making other countries dependent. So they would like America to be independent, but other countries, it's okay for them to be dependent on other other world powers that use force. But this is the first one about the monarch wasn't perfect, but it was still okay.
It's gone now, barely even remembered. Queen Elizabeth II was the last living link to a truly great Britain. Today on social media, the usual ghouls celebrated her death. Quote, "May her pain be excruciating," a Carnegie Mellon professor called Uju Anya wrote on Twitter of the Queen. "May she die in agony."
Flames, just pure flames. This can't even call this a roast. This is just straight to the juggler type of commentary.
Various know-nothings in the media, including a columnist at The Atlantic and a couple of employees of NBC News, seconded that thought. The British Empire was evil, they wrote, apparently totally unaware of what came after it. And speaking of what did come after the British Empire, how, for example, did Africa fare after the British left? Let's see. Uganda got Idi Amin, who was a cannibal. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe and then became the poorest country on the planet under the racist lunatic Robert Mugabe. As of tonight, South Africa is still being run into the ground by an incompetent kleptocrat called Cyril Ramaphosa. So it's hard to see any...
So he brings up how many countries? So he brought up a few countries to try and cast that onto the entire continent. He doesn't talk about Ghana at all, in any way, shape, or form. But we'll continue.
Any of that as an improvement, because it's not an improvement. Sorry, Atlantic Magazine. And now, of course, the entire...
And just another point, it wasn't just the British that went into Africa, it was several different European countries as well, too. So this is another thing that they like to do. They like to make sweeping general statements to make history, or in this case, geography, seem more simple than it actually is.
Continent of Africa has a new master, the Chinese government. China is the latest colonial power to dominate Africa.
So now, I mean, when it comes to China, they'll call out China. And China has not done the same amount of control that has been historically done through enslavement. It's like it's not even comparable. I understand there is a presence in China, but it's not the same history. It's a different way of colonializing Africa for sure. I agree 100%. But this is where Tucker Carlson shows that he's just a neophyte in African history, because this is what I'm saying. Unless it comes to somebody else, unless it comes to the Democrats, they'll acknowledge racism, but when it's about themselves, they will not acknowledge it. In this case, he's willing to bring up China because that is what's going on now. It's not the only thing that's going on now, but he's just bringing China up as if China is the only one that's currently in there. It's like China is just a new addition.
Its subjects will be pining for the British soon, assuming they are not already. In an ideal world, there would not be empires, no empires, only sovereign nations. But we don't have that world, and we never have had that world, going back to at least the Assyrians, 1400 years before Christ. In the real world, the one that we live in, strong countries dominate weak countries. And that
Okay, so this is another point about domination. So now, like, the new era of the alt-right likes to use this point about domination and conquered, and whoever's strongest should win. So I'm going to repeat what he just said, actually, just so that we fully understand exactly what he's saying, and then I'll break it down even more.
that trend, real world, the one going back to at least sovereign nations. But we in an ideal world, there would not be empires, no empires, only sovereign nations. But we don't have that world, and we never have had that world, going back to at least the Assyrians, 1400 years before Christ. In the real world, the one that we live in, strong countries dominate weak countries, and that trend shows no sign of changing.
So he's saying strong countries dominate weak countries. So this is a very interesting point, and I want to tackle it because it wasn't that Europeans were strong. It wasn't that the Europeans were strong, because when you look throughout history, there's always been a history of resistance from Africans against invading nations outside of Africa. There's always been resistance. There's always been an effort to rebuild empires after empires fallen. We've been successful in some cases with the resistance, but the only thing Europeans can take credit for is creating firearms and changing the whole frontier of warfare. Because yes, he's correct. There's always been conflict between nations, even within Africa as well too. But this idea of war and this idea of total elimination never existed until the Europeans got in and introduced firearms. And then once they introduced firearms, that's when we see the problems, especially the acceleration of enslavement. Um, Firearms really changed the game. So do I think Europeans are strong for creating firearms? No, I think no more so they introduced it because they know they couldn't beat Africans head on with the same technology. So they needed to create some type of advantage to get one up. They might call it strong. I don't really call it strong. I don't, to be honest, it is definitely, I would say it's definitely a form of cheating, but like it goes to the nature. I don't want to say cheating because that's like the wrong word, but it really does go to the nature of the European and how much they're willing to go to acquire what Africa had, because they were not warring with us because we didn't have nothing. They had everything that they wanted and what they lacked back home in their country. So without the introduction of firearms, will still be resisting till this day the complete landscape of Africa, and the rest of the world, to be honest, will be a lot different. But we'll continue because I don't think it's interesting, because saying that they're strong is giving them another reason to say it's okay what happened. We had a different sense of how we dealt with nations, even if we had conflict with them, pre-firearms, history before firearms, essentially. But I'll continue.
The very least you can say about the English is that they took their colonial responsibilities seriously.
They took their colonial responsibilities seriously.
They didn't just take things, they added.
So they didn't just take things, they added. So they take things, but they added as well too. Didn't care what was being added, whether the country needed it or not. They just added it to it. So now this is where we're gonna get into the whole um talking point of civilization. The British monarchy gave the world civilization because we were so primitive and we were completely lost savages without Europeans. Oh my God, thank God for the Queen and the monarchy.
When the US government withdrew from Afghanistan after 20 years, we left behind airstrips, shipping containers, and guns.
Now this is the biggest reach. This is the biggest reach so far. Just
When the British pulled out of India, they left behind an entire civilization, a language, a legal system, schools, churches, and public buildings.
you see, he wants to include the whole Afghanistan situation, and just to throw a shot at Biden. Like it's amazing how in the pursuit of being tone deaf, racist, obtuse, ignorant, they still find times to throw shots at the other enemies as well too. It's a crazy game, politics.
All of which are still in use today. Here's the train station the English built in Bombay, for example. There's nothing like that in Washington, D.C. right now, much less in Kabul or Baghdad. Today, India is far more powerful than the UK, the nation that once ruled it. And yet, after 75 years of independence, has that country produced a single building as beautiful as the Bombay train station that the British colonialists built?
Okay, so now this point about this is the most beautiful piece of land construction in India. I'm not Indian, so I wouldn't know, but this feels like cap right here. I could probably research in like 5 minutes and find buildings more beautiful than this, built by Indians, 100%. But we'll just continue.
No, sadly, it has not. Not one. So despite what they may be claiming on Twitter tonight, the British Empire was more than just genocide. In fact, the British did not commit genocide, except arguably against the Dutch during the Boer War. The British did give the world the Magna Carta and habeas corpus and free speech. They helped end the transatlantic slave trade, as well as the ritual murder of widows in India. The British Empire spread Protestant Christianity to the entire world.
So help end the enslavement, right? So this is what they like to say as well too. White people helped stop enslavement often and often, but the problem was that it started. So it's like he wants to acknowledge them for starting, but he doesn't want to acknowledge them. Sorry, he wants to acknowledge them for ending it, but he doesn't want to acknowledge them for starting it, because starting it caused the damage. Whether they ended it or not, it caused damage. That's the whole point. But this is the double talk that they engage in, that they believe in. On one hand, they don't want to acknowledge the atrocities, don't want to acknowledge the good, so they acknowledge that they stopped it, but they won't acknowledge that they started it. Right.
It published some of the greatest literature ever written and produced the finest manufactured goods ever made anywhere at any time, including now. It was an impressive place run by impressive people, including now, and produced the finest identity to the entire world. It published some of the greatest literature ever written and produced the finest manufactured goods ever made anywhere at any time, including now.
I don't think so. I don't think so about the greatest manufactured goods. Literature, I mean, it's crazy because he's given all the credit to Britain, but oftentimes the credit is given to Greek as having starting civilization and everything. I guess he's trying to say Britain helped give us modern civilization, but Greeks, they learned from the Africans. So I would disagree with him on these points. The greatest manufactured goods. Yeah, I would say after they got all the resources, they might have created some manufactured goods, but after they got all the resources that they needed to create those goods. So he wants to say that they created manufactured goods, some of the greatest in the world, but he doesn't want to acknowledge how they got those resources to create those goods from.
It was an impressive place run by impressive people. We will see many empires going forward, but we will never see one so benign. That's true. And because it's true, the people who would like to run the world in a far harsher way would like to make certain that you don't know it. And so they destroy the evidence that ever existed.
So now,
Here they are tearing down a statue of a British philanthropist in the UK 2 years ago.
so now he wants to get into the issue of destroying statues, which really has nothing to do with Queen Elizabeth. Maybe he's scared that they're gonna rip down statues of Queen Elizabeth, and rightfully so, in my opinion. But he does, like, not just Tucker Carlson, but the entire network of Fox does these far-stretching reaches when it's talking about issues pertaining to colonialism, imperialism, anti-black racism, so on and so forth. But this is the magician. These are the magic tricks that they play on the media.
Destroy the statue, erase the memory. That's why they're doing it. Slander the ruler, discredit the entire period she lived in. And that's exactly why they're attacking Queen Elizabeth tonight. Not because she was a bad person, she wasn't a bad person, but because she lived during a better time.
Yeah, the better time he's referring to is the ends where all the acts are committed, and now everyone, the world powers decide or pretends to decide to act normal in front of the masses. So all the atrocities are done. Same thing with the US. All the atrocities are done. Now we're in a better time in history. We've gotten past all of that. Then time and time again, we are reminded about the Holocaust. We are supposed to mourn the Holocaust, but then the monarchy, we're supposed to be, we're forced to face the monarchy through the media. I mean, there might be some ways you can cut off the information you get about the Queen, but in terms of like this event that's going on now, everybody in the entire world has to be reminded of it, whether or not you watch the media or not. So it's a lot of double standards, far-reaching double standards. I'm gonna expose more of them, but because I just did that video on the Queen, which you should check out, and I seen this, I just had to react to it. So I will be reacting to more of the not just Fox, but the overall right wing, I guess right wing echo chamber that spews the same misinformation and nonsense about anti-blackness and their the revisionist history that they like to give on a consistent basis just to make themselves feel better about what happened in history. If they think they were just strong in what they did, I would say this. I would say that they were barbaric because the African never imagined the barbarism that would come with the European. The problem, the biggest mistake probably is Africans thinking the European would play on a level playing field because that's what we've always done. You could read up on that, The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. I've read extensively on this history. Europeans were just more barbaric. So if they want to be the most barbaric people, they could have that medal for sure. But that's all for now. Stay tuned for the next video. Peace out. Comment what you think, of course. Let me know. Um, yeah, don't just be commenting to be commenting. I mean, I guess people will be commenting to be commenting, but I have a lot of extensive knowledge in history, so it's just not gonna be the regular trolling is just not gonna work. But peace out to the next episode.